Hello, and welcome to our second session of Screen Reader Savvy, refreshed for 2024. This session will focus on JAWS for Windows. Let's go ahead and get started. So just a couple of housekeeping things before we get into the meat of the presentation. And the first thing is what you would need to access JAWS if you didn't have a license. JAWS is available in 40-minute mode as a free download from the Freedom Scientific website. Basically, it would be the same version of JAWS that you would download to purchase, but you wouldn't have a license number to register it. So what happens is after 40 minutes, the program will stop working, and in order to get it to start working again, you'd need to restart your computer. At this point, then it's kind of, you kind of repeat this cycle. This is useful for a person who is at a public location or a friend's computer, or if they simply don't have their license information. It doesn't completely cut them off from use of the screen reader. There is not a way at this time to carry JAWS around on a flash drive and easily insert it into another PC and have it be a licensed copy. So that isn't a thing. Another way that JAWS can be accessed is through the American Printing House for the Blind. It is available for students that qualify for the APH federal quota program using quota funding. This is only for students that are enrolled in an educational institution that's K through 12, not higher learning. So there are details. There's a link in the resources to access the APH website. Contact your state's ex officio trustee for details about this if you are a teacher of the visually impaired. If you're not, then this really does not apply to you, but I did want to include it. One final note is about the modifier key. In the previous session of this course, I mentioned that we would talk about a modifier key. A screen reader's modifier key is a specific key that's designated to work specifically with screen reader commands. It's held down at the same time as the other keys as part of an assigned keystroke combination. The JAWS modifier key by default is the insert key, but this can be changed in the settings if needed. It can become the caps lock, the scroll lock, or the number lock keys. Here are some important commands just to be aware of before we proceed as well. The JAWS key or the modifier key, as we have discussed, can be changed in the settings. It will be referred to in this presentation both as insert or as JAWS key. I refer to it as both. You can increase or decrease the speech rate of JAWS temporarily, just in case you just want to hear a certain thing slower and then go back to your normal speed, or a certain thing faster and then go back to your normal speed. You can do that by pressing Control Alt and page up to increase or page down to decrease. To make that speech rate change permanent, you're going to press Alt Control Windows, or I like to say Alt Windows Control, because those three usually fall in a row on that left hand. So it's kind of neat to just push all those down and use page up to make the increase or page down to decrease. Typing echo is what happens when JAWS repeats as the user types. There are 4 options. There is speak typed characters, typed words, characters and words, or none. Depending on your level of comfort, proficiency, you can choose any of these just by cycling through the options with insert plus the number 2 on the number row. To exit JAWS, insert plus F4. You can just, from any point, just insert F4 to exit JAWS if for some reason you wish to do so. Moving on to the JAWS interface. The JAWS interface can be accessed at any time by pressing Insert plus J. The interface itself has a menu, which can also be accessed easily using the Alt key. By default, and you're going to hear that term a lot, the interface appears within the tab order, and it has an icon in the taskbar when it's running. However, settings can be adjusted to allow JAWS to run from the system tray, so it doesn't appear when the user switches between programs using the Alt-Tab method. And that just keeps it sort of out of the way and still accessible, but not like in your face. Moving on to the JAWS Basics menu, We can access that by within our JAWS interface with the Insert J, bring that up, and then do an Alt-O to access your Options menu. Arrow down to Basics or press B, either one, and press Enter to open this Basic Settings dialog. You're going to navigate this dialog like all dialogues using your Tab key, and to make changes using arrow keys. I want to explain a couple of different areas of this dialog in particular before we progress. The tutor messages area, which is the first item that you're going to see, it means that JAWS will give you prompts, will provide prompts on what to do next, possible actions to proceed in a lower register, lower pitch a little bit, and we'll talk about why that is. But it will say things like press enter to open, or press arrow keys to navigate, or something similar to that. And those prompts are great for beginners, but they can be really annoying for more advanced users. So you can turn these tutor messages on or filter them a little bit more carefully if you wish to do so in this area as well as some other areas. The second section of the dialog is the speak access keys. What happens with that is that when JAWS encounters that there's an access key that will get you to an action with a shorter number of keystrokes or fewer keystrokes, it'll announce that keystroke option. And if the user accesses that setting in the menus multiple times, they'll hear that keystroke repeatedly, and hopefully over time they'll try using that keystroke, and that will probably encourage them to use that rather than to go the long way around. And as we have said before, the goal here is efficiency. Now, this is the part that's often very fun to work with kids on, the JAWS Voices menu. JAWS Voice can be adjusted in a variety of ways, but this way is great because it helps us to introduce the concept of navigating dialog boxes to students. And they're highly motivated because guess what? They get to make JAWS sound funny, and they enjoy that. So the way to get to this JAWS voice adjustment dialog is to open your JAWS interface with Insert J, and I'm going to stop telling you to do that pretty soon when I start, but Insert J and then Alt-O for the Options menu, arrow down to Voices or press V, and you can press Enter and then press Enter again on Voice Adjustment, and you'll be presented with this Voice Adjustment dialog. Something that's important to know is by default, the profile that's in focus will be Eloquence Factory, and that is the default profile. New profiles can be created or changed, but the factory default can't. It's a safety feature. It's like you can't mess with it because they don't want their defaults to be messed up in case there are some major problems. Changing the profile name is pretty easy. You can just use a down arrow to choose a different profile and move down to choose a different synthesizer. You can do all sorts of different things with it. In order to make changes, that's kind of a necessary thing to change the actual voice. So to adjust the person or pitch, the user has to choose a specific cursor to change. So that sounds silly, but JAWS has multiple cursors. JAWS has a PC cursor, a JAWS cursor, a keyboard voice, and a tutor and message voice. So you have to specify which thing you're changing before you can change a whole lot of other things. So by default, it's read. You can definitely navigate the dialog by using your tab keys to go down to the rate percentage. You can adjust his pitch, all of that stuff. Another thing that is important to know about is the amount of punctuation that's announced. If you're on a website, for example, and you're reading about something, it's really super annoying when the screen reader will tell you all of the punctuation that shows up. If it says the period in every sentence, if it says the apostrophe in every word, that's kind of obnoxious, and nobody really wants that unless they're proofreading. You can change the punctuation level, which is pretty easy to do just by choosing none, some, most, or all, and all of those are defined. So if it's none, it will literally tell you no punctuation at all. Definitely play with this setting if you want to hear different amounts of punctuation based on your task or your need. There are keyboard shortcuts to adjust these things also, by the way. One thing I do want to emphasize also is there's an area of this dialog box, and it's grayed out at the moment, but the grayed out area says spell rate change. That means when JAWS spells something letter by letter, it does it a little slower, which is, kind of helpful because usually when you want something spelled out, there's a reason and you want it to be done slower. You can change how slow it slows down to bring that. Currently it's set at 20, but you can change it to, like, if you want it to go slower or faster, you can change that number. Similarly, below that is the pitch, the capital pitch change. And what that means is when JAWS is reading and it wants to indicate a capital, it will say it in a higher pitch. Sometimes people who have hearing loss or people who have sensory issues with high tones like that, they would prefer that tone be a little less pronounced or more pronounced depending. And you can change that by changing the number. Moving on to using JAWS with a Braille display. The Braille display options can be accessed from the JAWS interface in the options menu, like we've seen it before. Before attempting to add your Braille display, it's a really good idea to make sure that all the necessary drivers have been downloaded from the site that you purchased your Braille display from. So go to the manufacturer's website and make sure that drivers for JAWS have been downloaded, because JAWS does not automatically include all of the drivers for all of the Braille displays. And this is especially true if you happen to be running a version of JAWS that maybe isn't the most current version. So just be aware of that moving forward. Now, there are a few settings on this dialog, and the probably most important are the first two that you're going to run across when you're tabbing through. The first one tells you what the active Braille display is. That's the Braille display that's currently connected and being used. In this screenshot, it says the active Braille display is no display, and that is what's going to show up when you go to add a Braille display, because there's nothing that has been currently selected to add. Once you add that Braille display, it shows up like this. That's letting you know that there's a connection error. The next one, if you tab through, is the default Braille display. In this particular example, there is not a default set, but again, once you install that Braille display, like we're going to talk about in the next slide, there will be options of ones to pick from. Which display do you want to automatically launch when you turn on JAWS or when JAWS launches? And of course, there are also other settings in the Braille display basic setting dialog. Of note, really, is the bottom checkbox, and that checkbox is called Show Braille Load Error, which will display a dialog box when JAWS starts if the default Braille display is not loading. And it's kind of a nice little notification to have to kind of alert you to a problem, so you can go into this dialog and see what the issue is. There's a new addition to this dialog in newer versions of JAWS that is called Run JAWS Without Speech. And a lot of users have this preference that are Braille first users that do not want to be hearing speech all the time. Either they're in an environment where that's not appropriate, or they just prefer not to. And they prefer that Braille first experience. You have to run JAWS when using a Braille display or another screen reader. Any screen reader will do. But otherwise, the Braille display cannot communicate with the computer. There's like a translation problem, and that Braille display depends on that screen reader to be that translator. Now let's talk about adding a Braille display. Assuming you have pressed the button to add a display from the previous dialog box, this is what you're going to be shown. Many Braille displays have pre-installed drivers that we've talked about as part of the JAWS install, but not all of them do. And remember, always refer to the instructions by the manufacturer of your Braille display to figure out where to download those drivers if your Braille display does not appear in this list. Once drivers are installed, the display should appear in this list, and you should be able to complete the wizard to complete the installation process. And you should be able to check the checkbox for the display that you want to use. You also may select multiple displays in the event that you have more than one, so that's also a possibility. Now let's talk about JAWS settings. The JAWS settings can be accessed a couple of different ways. The first way is through the Utilities menu from the JAWS interface. Again, you would do that Insert J, do an Alt U to open the Utilities menu, and then arrow down to where it says Settings Center, and you would press Enter to open it. By the way, the Settings Center can also be accessed with a screen reader shortcut, which is the Insert key plus the number 6 on the number row, not the number 6 on the number pad. That's a totally different command, on the number row. Now that we've launched the Settings Center, we're going to learn how to navigate it. There are various areas of that Settings Center that can be navigated with the Tab key. By default, your JAWS cursor will land in the search box first, and you're going to navigate using that Tab key as usual. So when you press Tab, you're going to have focus in the tree view, and that allows navigation of various settings. We're going to come back to that. Then you have the reading pane, if you press Tab again, and that will explain what the control is that's in focus and what it does, and any pertinent other information. If you press Tab again, you'll focus on the OK button, then Tab and you'll focus on Cancel. If you tab one more time, it's going to cycle you up to the top, and what that is that's the application dropdown. For example, if I'm focused in Microsoft Word, any changes that are applied in the JAWS Settings Center here, unless I change it, will only apply to Microsoft Word when Microsoft Word is running. So it's important to remember, if you want to change a setting that's going to apply to all contexts across the board, you want to navigate to this drop down and choose all contexts. Or to do that with a shortcut, it's easy to do. It's a little easier. Control, Shift, and the letter D will bring you to apply the settings that you're going to be changing to all contexts and not just the running application. So as promised, let's talk a little bit about what that tree view is. The tree view can be considered, if you think about it, as an actual tree, where the main areas of the settings center are part of the trunk. And then if you want to explore an area of that main trunk, you're going to press the right arrow to expand it, and that allows you to climb out on a branch. There might be multiple branches on each branch. So there's different settings within settings. And it sounds confusing, but realistically, this is something that happens a lot. There are a lot of tree views in different areas of Windows and other programs, so learning to navigate a tree view is kind of important. In JAWS in particular, when you are opening and closing that tree view with the tree view area or those branches with that left and right arrow key, that will kind of orient you to where kind of you are. JAWS will tell you whether it's expanded or collapsed, things like that are available. So you are going to get feedback on that. So what happens when you want to change the setting that you found? That's actually pretty easy. You're going to press the spacebar to navigate between the setting options that exist. And when you are focused on one or the one that JAWS says, you can just navigate away. There isn't a save, there isn't something that you have to press to make that setting take effect. It just takes effect. At any point, you can press Enter to exit the settings center. The one thing that I did want to mention was about 2/3 of this dialog is visually dedicated to like a pane that shows part of what the settings area or settings branch, when it's expanded, what settings are available to be changed. That generally is not navigated by the JAWS user. That is mainly for people who are sighted or can see, to assist them in making changes using their mouse pointer. The JAWS user is going to make those changes in the tree view. Moving on to the pronunciation dictionary. Some students, or even adults to be honest, might dislike having JAWS pronounce their name or other words that they hear frequently incorrectly. It's a fortunate thing then that JAWS has a pronunciation dictionary, and the user can choose how JAWS says or pronounces words that it comes across by phonetically spelling them out and kind of defining how JAWS would say them. You can get to this pronunciation dictionary by pressing JAWS plus D or insert D to open the dictionary manager. This is going to open a dialog box that is going to ask the user to create a JDF or a JAWS dictionary file that will only apply to the current application. But as we've seen before in the Settings Center, you can open the default dictionary that will apply the change across all settings by using the command Control-Shift-D. The screenshot here shows the default dictionary. The user can add words, modify or delete entries, other things like that. As usual, you're going to use your tab key to navigate around and press enter to navigate a button. To expand or collapse items in the tree view, press right and left arrow. Once the user has chosen to add a word to the dictionary, a dialog box will come up. By default, the JAWS cursor will be in an edit field where you're going to want to type the actual word as it appears. In this example, I've chosen the word Hofstadter or the name Hofstadter because that one does come out funny when JAWS says it. If I want to hear how JAWS says it, I can always press Alt-A to be reminded of how JAWS says that word. If I press Tab, I can go down to where the replacement word is. This is where I want to phonetically spell out how I want JAWS to say the word. You probably are going to need to do this a lot of times. If you're lucky, not more than a couple, but it may take several depending on how tricky the word is and how precise you want JAWS to say it. To hear JAWS repeat that word, how it's going to be pronounced moving forward, you'll want to press Alt-R to hear JAWS announce the replacement. Pressing Tab again will allow the user to select a sound that would be played in place of that word that was entered in the first box. And that can be handy sometimes, as I'm sure you can imagine. If you continue to navigate down using your tab key, you'll be allowed to pick what language the replacement applies to. Most of these things don't really necessarily need to be finely tuned unless there's something in particular that you're looking for. So here are the takeaways from the pronunciation dictionary. Save the dictionary before exiting with Control-S. This is one of them. You do need to save the entry. When you're unsure which dictionary is in focus, if you press JAWS T to hear the title of the window or simply use the command Control-Shift-D, it'll tell you which dictionary you're modifying or adding to. The user can also place focus before a word to add to a dictionary and press JAWS D, and this will place the word that is right in front of the cursor in the actual word field. So if you are in suppose a browser and you come across a word that JAWS is not saying correctly, you can press Insert D and go to the dictionary manager and it will automatically place the word that is to the right of the cursor in that field, so you don't need to worry about making sure you copy it correctly. The dictionary manager, by the way, can also be opened up using the JAWS key or Insert plus F2 and then pressing D, or using the arrows to navigate to the dictionary option and pressing enter. So, as usual, there's more than one way to accomplish a goal. We all need help sometimes, so it's important to know how to get help from JAWS that you can easily access. The JAWS interface has a help menu, which you can access by pressing Insert J and then doing an Alt-H for the help menu. It'll bring down a menu with a lot of options, and we'll talk about those as we move forward. There are three main ways to get help in JAWS. The first way is to press JAWS key or insert plus F1. This will get you help in the current context or program that you're focused in. So in Word, in a browser, in Windows, all of those things. The second way is to press JAWS plus the number one on the number row, not in the keypad, because that's a totally different thing. JAWS plus the number one will toggle keyboard help on or off. So what that means is if keyboard help is on, you can press a keyboard command or a series of keys, and JAWS will report what the key is that you pressed or the key combination and what that key combination will do. It's a great way to really quickly check that you're going to perform the right command before you do it in case you're uncertain and you're afraid that changes will happen to your document or whatever you're working on before you actually press the command. So it's one way of doing it. It's another way to work with students sometimes. There's a lot of really good uses for JAWS plus the number 1 to turn on and off that keyboard help. The last way is my personal favorite way of getting some help in JAWS, and that's pressing JAWS plus space followed by the letter J. This command opens the JAWS command search window. From here, the user can type a command or search for a command by its function. So let's pretend I forgot how to launch the Settings Center. If I press Insert plus space followed by the letter J, and I type Settings, I can use my down arrow and kind of navigate the list, and that'll show me all of the things that mention the word settings. And eventually I'll get down to where it says Settings Center, and it will tell me the command. A big way of getting help in JAWS is the JAWS Help dialog. When focused in the JAWS Help interface area, pressing F1 will open the Help Topics dialog. This is the JAWS Help interface here. As you can see, if you are looking at this screen, it's divided into two main bigger areas, but there are also other areas. There's that tree view that we've been talking about, and there's the reading pane that is on the right and takes up maybe 2/3 of the screen at the most, and that's where your help will display. There are navigation commands to get among these different areas. Control Tab will switch among the Index, Search, and Contents tab. You can search in an index and navigate the index to search what you're looking for. You can do a search for a specific topic using a search field, or you can just see the whole table of contents. That, by the way, is what's displayed here is the table of contents. F6 will navigate between the navigation pane and the information pane. The navigation pane being, of course, the tree view area, and the information pane, which is that reading pane area that takes up that 2/3 of that screen. Use your standard reading commands in the information pane, by the way. They're pretty easy. We did cover volume in session 1 of this series, but I did want to come back to it and talk about the JAWS volume control. Insert plus space will open that JAWS layered mode. You'll hear it say bonk or like a small sound to indicate the layered mode is active. Press V to indicate you want to change the volume. Then you have a couple choices. To change the JAWS volume of just the screen reader, press the letter J. To increase or decrease the volume of the speakers, press the letter S, either one. Regardless of which you chose, use page up and page down keys to adjust the volume by larger increments, or use the up and down arrows to adjust the volume by like smaller 1 to 2% increments. You do not need to press enter or otherwise confirm your selection because it will be automatically applied. And on the slide in the resources of this presentation, there will be a link that is called Adjust JAWS Volume on the Fly, and it's a YouTube video put out by Freedom Scientific that's actually quite good. It runs you through the whole thing. And that covers it. I hope this has been helpful for you. We'll see you next time.